Orcs of Arachion. There is perhaps no story in recent memory as tragic as that of the Orcs of Arachion, a thriving civilization whose growth was cut short by terrible forces well outside their control. Maybe you've seen some of them, arriving in small flocks of destitute survivors at human and dwarven cities. Or maybe you've seen their more tragic side, in the shape of starved bodies by the roadway. Be that how it may, it's impossible to ignore that something has disturbed the peace in the ancient lands of Orakion. The orcs that have managed to flee speak of metaphysical prophecies, curses, and divine punishments. Certainly nothing coherent, as testimonies contradict each other and make little conventional sense. The semi-deserted land of Arachion is the subject of much prophetic and religious writing, especially in texts that come to us from ancient times. While the canyons, dunes, and arid grasslands have been dominated by the orcish tribes for as long as anyone alive today can remember, it's important to note that this hasn't always been the case. Arachion is known as the cradle of civilizations for a reason, which is that many of today's most powerful societies were born there and eventually displaced for one reason or another. However, unlike other mythical lands charged with religious and political meaning, there have been no crusades to retake it, no pilgrimages to visit its ancient wonders, or tales of returning. This seeming lack of interest towards their origins is, to say the least, extremely surprising, considering the proud nature of many civilizations with their roots in Orakion. The simple fact that the orcs were able to hold it uncontested for hundreds of years should be considered a miracle in and of its own. As with everything, there is an answer for even the most complicated questions. To solve this puzzle, we'll have to travel back to the times when the very first civilization was born in the mythical land of Arachion. Known nowadays as the Primordials, this society is little more than a footnote in the gargantuan tomes of knowledgeable arcanists and historians. They grew to become the most powerful empire in the world over the course of a few centuries, mostly thanks to their incredible arcane prowess, which saw them rise above threats that profoundly oppressed other civilizations, such as dragon incursions and natural disasters. They became so powerful, in fact, that some say they had a direct connection to the gods themselves, like they could talk to them. Whether this is true, or just vestiges of the primordials' hubris that lived on to this very day, will probably remain unknown. But it certainly isn't impossible, considering just how proficient they were with magic. This civilization could make rivers flow backwards, enchant whole islands to float in the sky as if they were weightless, and teleport entire towns across great distances when convenient. The reason every kingdom nowadays isn't a vassal to this supernaturally powerful empire is that they went extinct. Maybe it's the nature of all sentient species to overreach when they achieve levels of power similar to that of the primordials. A collaboration between the world's best historians, arcanists, theologists, and archaeologists has finally shed some light on how the downfall of this original civilization is related to not only the exodus of the orcs, but also that of several races before them. The primordials created a cursed artifact, a gargantuan arcane cannon, capable of siphoning the energy of the gods. A weapon whose very existence triggered a war between divinity and mortals. As it's natural, the gods prevailed over the comparatively fickle and power-drunk primordials. They cursed the arcane cannon with divine magic of cataclysmic power, suspecting that they would eventually come to use it in an attempt of replacing them by absorbing their essence. As fortune would have it, the gods were right, and the might of the cannon had a very different effect than what the primordials expected. A wave of dark energy washed over Arachion, turning fertile grasslands into desert, vaporizing anyone it came into contact with, and placing omens of misfortune all around. Anything that could go wrong did go wrong. Infrastructure collapsed, armies mutinied, and civil war took care of the few surviving primordials. The arcane cannon was buried beneath the sands, consigned to darkness within forgotten ruins with strange markings that spell catastrophe in ancient language etched on their walls. After centuries, the darkness subsided and allowed for life to thrive again in Arachion, as if the gods were giving mortals a second chance. Ever since, new societies have risen in the desert, and when they become powerful enough, they can't resist digging up the vestiges left behind by the primordials and experimenting with artifacts whose power they are very far from comprehending. New waves of darkness have washed over Arachion every time after the new inhabitants of the land accidentally or purposefully activate the arcane cannon's magic. This has caused the massive diasporas that seem to take place every few centuries, and the one we are seeing now with survivors from the Orcish tribes of Arachion. Part 2. The Journey. After a major political event known as the Consortium of the Tribes, Arachion's many Orcish clans established a central council to rule over all of them, paving the way for the Orc nation to gain superior influence and cohesion by ending territorial disputes and focusing the race's efforts on the building of a more prosperous nation. They follow the path of all civilizations born in the land of Arachion, of course. They discovered ancient artifacts buried in the sand that allowed them to perform wondrous magic, and they wondered what else they could find if they just dug deep enough. High King Wykar did what any ruler would do when finding a magical structure larger than anything his civilization ever made. Use it. A few members of the Central Council opposed triggering the arcane cannon for fear of prophetic curses. But the warnings of history and prophecy are fickle in comparison to the freedom of the present moment. What happened after Wykar fiddled with the intricate mechanisms of the primordials was an absolute catastrophe, as expected. The same dark wave washed over Arachion, thrusting the orcs into near extinction and immediately killing those who were too close at the time. Those that survived the grim shockwave, about a third of the total population before the disaster, soon became acquainted with the devastating aftermath it leaves behind. Infertile soil, auras of misfortune, psychic energies capable of blasting sanity away, and a plethora of similar curses. If they wanted to maintain their survivor status, fleeing Arachion was the only option. The remaining question was how they would do that, as most other races despise the orcs and would probably kill them on sight. The other option was to cross the Kyr Mountains to the north and venture into a completely unexplored land. With both prospects being terrifying, the remaining orcs were deeply divided and disorganized. Out of the shadows, a charismatic and valiant figure emerged to lead them, although not everyone agreed with her decision. The daughter of High King Wykar, Thytak, was one of the few Central Council members to disagree with her father and decided to leave the capital along with her most ardent followers, sheltering themselves and anyone who would listen to their reasons within a hastily built bunker teeming with abjuration runes. Thytak thought that the best option was crossing the mountain range to the north, because life as slaves of other races was not a worthy destiny for the proud orcish children of Arachion. Some agreed, others disagreed, but in the end, most were desperate enough to follow her into the frost And with the exception of a few groups that decided to travel south to the humans, or east to the dwarves, they equipped their warmest and sturdiest leather clothes and began the odyssey that would take them to their new home. When Thytok, daughter of Waikar, said that the orcs were to cross the Kier Peaks, no one doubted it would be the harshest endeavor they had ever faced, but still much better than staying behind in the cursed land of Arachion. However, they couldn't have possibly imagined just how terrible it would be. Kier is the very definition of the word uninhabitable, not only because of its freezing weather, snowstorms, avalanches, and precipices, but also because of something few ever speak of: the monstrosities that have made it their home. Frost spiders, horrible beings the size of a barrel, were one of the worst creatures they encountered. Their poison is cruel like no other, increasing the freezing point of blood, effectively solidifying their victims' bodies in a painful process known as sanguine crystallization. They were not the only species to claim the lives of many orcs, though. Zenith wolves, a winged variant of the common predators, took hundreds of them in their aerial hunting raids. After 19 grueling months of travel, they managed to leave behind the icy hellscape of Kier, descending into more temperate hills, but still taller than anything the orcs had ever climbed before the cataclysm, of course. Those hills are known as Death's Stairway by the orcs. Such is the trauma Kier left on them. Only a small fraction of all those who followed Thytok survived the perilous journey. From the lost hills of Death's Stairway, the twice surviving Orcs of Arachion could finally bear witness to their new homeland, a beautiful region they named Seamstone, because of its curious rocky formations that intertwined with patches of moss and grass. Slowly descending, their bones still chilled from the journey through Kier, the orcs made their first huts. Despite all the loss and suffering, a festive mood washed over Thytok's host, and hastily collected fruit and roasted boar were laid out in a feast. Relative abundance welcomed them into this new land, with readily available fruit, lumber, and wild animals. After most had recovered from the exhaustion of the journey, the orcs began their quest to scout the land around them, to locate good hunting spots, and mark down the places where valuable resources could be found. According to folklore, a town only becomes a town when the first inhabitant dies and is buried by their people. That milestone marks the moment where the settlement is established, not only in the material plane, but also in the spirit realm. Seamstone's first death arrived fairly quickly, only 3 days after they landed down from Death's Stairway, as a brave warrior named Kural Taikir died after the wounds left by a frost spider proved too much to bear. And as the spirit realm became acquainted with the Orcs of Arakion's new home, something eerie encroached their settlement. Even the dullest of orcs has noticed that something isn't quite in its place within Seamstone. Not since Kural died. Children are scared of playing outside, and they speak of moving shadows that observe them from the edges of the region's many caves. No one knows what strange powers rule this land, but Thytok and her followers know that they must uncover it quickly before they are exiled by the supernatural once again.